celebrate our 200th episode of the Your Morning Coffee podcast, we are thrilled to be joined by music industry attorney Dina LaPolt. Our listeners will recognize that name. We've talked about her many times and talked about her incredible work a lot on this podcast. Dina is quite simply a force of nature.
She sure is. Dina became an attorney back in 1997 after being in the music industry since she was 13. LaPolt was formerly a musician and performed in multiple rock bands on the East Coast in the 1980s and 90s. She later became a club promoter and artist manager working for Street Gang Productions.
Dina is a founder of LaPolt Law. It's an LA-based law firm representing some of the world's top entertainers and entrepreneurs. She's also an expert at solving sophisticated legal and business issues relating to contracts, copyrights, trademarks, rights of publicity, and litigation.
So her background in law, music, and teaching, and her exceptional attention to detail combine for an approach to client problem solving that is unique in the industry. She also serves as a forceful activist for creators and celebrities working on legislative matters that affect the rights of her clients.
Yeah, through innovative deals, highly personalized service, social justice initiatives, and a passion for doing right by the artist, LaPolt Law consistently ranks among the top firms in the entertainment industry and is the only law firm of its stature founded and operated by a sole female attorney.
So back in 2017, LaPolt worked with members of Congress to write and introduce the Music Modernization Act, also known as the MMA, which changed the way songwriters are paid for use of their works by streaming services. In April of 2018, she was recognized on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives by the MMA's author, Congressman Doug Collins, a Republican from Georgia, for her work spearheading the MMA. Back in September of 2018, the Music Modernization Act was unanimously passed in the U.S. Senate.
That's right. In 2019, LaPolt became the youngest attorney and only the second woman in history to receive the Recording Academy's prestigious Service Award at its annual Entertainment Law Initiative event. That same year, she was inducted into Billboard's Women in Music Hall of Fame.
She is frequently named to many best-of lists, including Billboard's Power 100, The Hollywood Reporter's Power Lawyers, Variety's Dealmakers Impact Report, Super Lawyers, and others.
That's right. Most recently, Dina LaPolt has been pivotal advisor to members of Congress on the RAP Act, that's Restoring Artistic Protection, RAP Act, which aims to rein in the practice of citing an artist's rap lyrics as evidence in legal proceedings against them.
So without further ado, here is Jay's and my conversation with Dina LaPolt. Let's let it roll.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand! Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air. On the air. On the air. On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
LaPolt, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such an honor to talk to you.
It's so good to be here. I love it. Your morning coffee. Thanks for having me. I love coffee. I love Jay. It's all good.
All right. Let's talk about, well, there's so much we'd love to talk to you about, so we're going to jump right in. My first question for you is, tell me about some of the essential clauses artists should pay attention to in record label contracts today.
Well, the big one, which is the hot topic of the year, is the re-record clause. You know?
Yeah.
Now we're all calling that the Taylor Swift provision. So we're calling that. So normally what it says is 7 years after the release of the last record under the agreement, you can start re-recording your sound recordings. So if you're in a term, and most record deals go on for a better part of 10 years, because that's another thing. I mean, you have like options. You know what an option is? An option is bad for the artist, you know, because a legal definition of option is you basically not good for one party. And, you know, you can imagine between a record company and an artist, who is it not good for?
Yeah.
So the trick is when you're negotiating a record deal to try and get the record company to agree to firm records, because that means they have to actually put the records out. Because when you have options, they don't actually have to put them out. So it's a whole legal conundrum. Wow. But yes, that re-record provision, that's a biggie.
I bet.
I actually have a follow-up to that, Dina. You know, they call it the Taylor Swift clause for a reason. Jay and I have mentioned on our show a number of times that we've worked with artists that have re-records. And it's not, is it really a huge deal outside of Taylor Swift? I mean, she's such a unique case. Is it really something that everybody should be kind of agonizing over? Because it's been around for a long time and it's not ever really such a huge deal.
Well, it is a huge deal if the record company owns your sound recordings. And normally that's how it's been for a long time. More and more the trend is now, because we have so many platforms like TikTok and Instagram and places like that where you can really blow up your music and create huge leverage for yourself, you know, and you can own your own sound recordings and just do an exclusive licensing deal with the record company. But normally the record company owns the sound recordings. So at the end of a record deal, if the artist re-records their sound recordings, then they own a version of that recording themselves. And then they can negotiate in a free market without the record company. That's like 50% more money, at least. That's if they're on a net profit split. Usually they're on a crappy royalty. So it's the difference between collecting $1 and 14 cents of the dollar.
Yeah, that's a big difference. That is a big difference.
How can artists negotiate favorable terms with record labels today, particularly regarding royalties, creative control, and ownership rights?
They need to create leverage for themselves. And I'm telling you, I'm so glad Universal Music just settled with TikTok, because for 3 months they took every artist they had and every songwriter they had off of TikTok. And I got to tell you, I mean, I agree with the premise that TikTok has to pay, you know, because it's terrible the way they pay. It's worse than YouTube. But it is such a great platform for an artist to create leverage for themselves, because we have artists now, new artists that are getting signed to record deals that have 5 million followers on TikTok and 2 million followers on Instagram. So when I'm in that position as their lawyer, oh my God, it's so good. It's so good.
What are the common revenue streams that labels are asking to participate in these days?
They try to get an all rights deal. I mean, but again, if you have zero leverage as an artist, you're almost stuck. Okay, but normally they want a percentage of every ancillary right you have. So whether it's merchandising, sponsorships, endorsements. Sometimes they want the first right to negotiate your publishing. Sometimes there's a matching right in there, because, you know, all 3 major labels have, you know, are all 3 major publishers. So there's a lot of like conflicts. But if you have a lot of leverage, you can really negotiate your deal for records only, and that's the key.
Yeah.
How have record label contracts evolved over the last decade or so?
Oh, God. Well, you know what I always say? Like, it's 100 pages, these record deals. And I always say it's a result of litigation. I mean, this is what happens. Like, for example, I'll give you one example. So I think in 1979, Olivia Newton-John wanted to jump ship on her record, or she, didn't, her record deal was 5 years or something. And, after 5 years, she was like, peace, I'm out. And at the time it was MCA Records, and they got into litigation. And that's how now record deals, because of that litigation, because the record company lost, what they do is they have provisions in the recording agreement now saying that you're not signed for years, you're signed to periods, and those periods consist of when you sign the agreement up until one period will be, when they exercise their option or they open the recording fund up until 9 months after that record is released. That's one period. And that could be a 4-year period. So because of that litigation that was favorable to the artist, we ended up getting 7 more pages. I'm just exaggerating, but we get several more paragraphs in the agreement to further hold the artist down. So as a result of all these litigations, now this record contract is 100 pages. Terrible.
I want to swing back to the TikTok issue. Obviously, the deal they've come to an agreement, UMG and TikTok, but of course TikTok now is in a world of hurt in terms of this new law, and they are threatening to now go to court over this. What could happen? I'm not familiar with how the government can force the issue with a company like this. What rights does TikTok have to kind of come back or take to court? Can they reverse that somehow?
I mean, it's very interesting, and from as far as I understand, it's non-precedential, right? Where a government entity is basically saying this private business, you can't do business in the United States unless you divest your interests in your Chinese company and open something solely in the U.S. And that's what the government is saying. And it's really scary because at the end of the day, they could give you, 6 months to get rid of the platform on your phone or whatever. If not, there's like fines and penalties from what I understand. But they can do that if it's a threat to national security, because TikTok, I mean, think about it. It's like you could go on TikTok for an hour and you could be looking at things on TikTok, and if there's certain things like ads that come up, like you're like, oh, these sheets that make you cold at night, that sounds awesome because I run hot. And you just click on that to look at how much they are and what they look like. And then you're like, maybe I don't really need that. And you close the screen. The next thing you know, you have all these other ads coming at you for betting. So think about it. If we're trying to protect national security, all these things that consumers in the U.S. are looking on these screens, like if the platform is collecting information, I understand the thinking that could be very dangerous, especially you have this communist country that is gathering intel on the United States. So I get it in theory, but when you step back and you just think about it, it's like silly. It's crazy.
Yeah. One of the other hot topics today is artificial intelligence, AI.
Yes.
There's you know more about this than most. I mean, the technology now using generative AI to create new works based on somebody's body of work. There's also voice cloning. We've seen a lot of that lately. What are the copyright issues surrounding AI generated music, and how can your artists ensure proper attribution and, more importantly, compensation?
Yeah, this is a great topic and a hot topic. Let me tell you, there's 2 separate bodies of law, okay, if you will. You have the copyrights, and then you have, trademark, and then you have rights of publicity. So let me break it down to your first question on copyrights, okay? First of all, generative AI, creators use generative AI, just like they use Pro Tools and Ableton. I mean, if you could recall back in the 70s, you're gathering 40 pieces in a recording studio to make a record, right? Now we just have our laptop. I mean, some artists, some albums that have won Grammys have been created on an iPhone. Okay, so this is technology. So we have to be very careful with copyright. So right now, the Copyright Office, they put out a rulemaking a few years ago on the gorilla case. Do you remember this? There was that gorilla that took a picture in the Amazon, and the owner of the gorilla tried to copyright in the gorilla's name, and the Copyright Office said, no, you have to be a human. So they, 2022, they reached out to a lot of creator groups, a lot of creator music lawyers, one of which was me, and said, we're thinking of maybe we need a rulemaking or we need a legislative fix for copyright. And I said, no. And we literally, the Copyright Office came to Nashville, New York, LA, Miami, and met with the prominent music lawyers. And obviously, I being in LA, I was in the LA meetings with a bunch of my other colleagues. And we said, no, we do not need a legislative fix. Because when a creator is using generative AI, it's actually their creation, okay? Because what the Copyright Office was wanting to do was bifurcate the registration. And I said, really? Like, we're going to tell our clients, like, oh, tell us what portion of the song was written using AI so we can tell the Copyright Office and then they could dilute your copyright registration. Like, we're not going to tell you that. And I said, but we didn't go to law school to tell our clients to lie either. So, you don't need a legislative fix. There's a big difference between a gorilla taking a picture and a producer using generative AI, to fine-tune a top-line lyric or a beat, you know what I mean? So that's one issue. So that's that issue, and the music community is pretty aligned on that. No legislative fix on that. The other issue is the AI machines that are ingesting our clients' work. That we're all aligned on, that there needs to be a voluntary licensing scheme for that. So it's like, you can literally hop on ChatGPT and say, hey, write a song about Jay and Mike in the morning coffee show and in style of Aerosmith. And literally within 6 seconds, you have an entire song that just pops up on the screen. So, you obviously know these machines are ingesting all of our clients' copyrights. So calling for, a voluntary licensing of those machines is essential. And we learned how to do that with the digital music revolution. I mean, this was the whole issue with Napster. And the music industry learned from that, by the way. So instead of litigating Napster for 5 years and wasting all this time and money, they learned. So they're literally getting on the AI board, but they're like, we need a licensing scheme. We need some voluntary licensing mechanisms. And then the third issue, which is something that I'm very, very involved in, which is creating a federal right of voice and likeness. So right now, there's only a handful of states in the United States that have rights of publicity statutes. So your rights of publicity is the commercial use of your image. And the more famous you are, the more, the more your image is worth. So if we created a federal right of voice and likeness, not only will it create a new intellectual property right that's fully licensable by the creator, it's definitely going to give us statutory protections to pull things down. Because right now what happens is we wake up to these deep fakes. I mean, one day I woke up to a hit song by Drake and 21 Savage. And I represent 21 Savage. And the manager calls me and says, that's not him. And I go, oh my God. And it literally took our office and the record company and his publisher company a few days to pull it down. Because we didn't have one statutory body of law that we could go to. Like, I was like, going through the rights of publicity statute in California. Okay, we've registered his company to do business in California, so we derive the benefits of the laws of California, so I can go on it there for the commercial right of his image. What do we do on voice? And the record company was like, well, we have the exclusive right to use his voice on recordings because we have an exclusive record deal. So it's like all of this analysis with many lawyers, a few days to pull this down. But this new law is desperately needed because it creates, it'll seek to fill the gaps in current legal protections that we don't have.
Are there any states that have that, the publicity rights? Or is that just not exist at all?
We just passed in Tennessee the Elvis Act, the very first state in the nation that passed a bill dealing with voice and likeness. Again, but it's Tennessee, so that doesn't help us in the other, robust states here in the nation, and certainly overseas is a big problem. I mean, we're all dealing with this right now. But, the big difference is having the statutory rights. So like, for example, for copyright, if you infringe on someone's copyright, you can not only pull it down, okay, but there's retribution, okay? There's remuneration for the use, okay? For the unauthorized use of that person's copyright, there's statutory damages equal to up to $150,000 per use, or, what would commercially be paid to you had you licensed the copyright under the law. So if we had this federal right of voice and likeness, it would change the game. And we introduced this, by the way. Like, this was a bill that was introduced, during Grammys week, which we tried to do because we get a lot of politicians out here during Grammys week, and we can have a field hearing. So we, talked about it over Grammys, and we had a field hearing about it, and we introduced the No AI Frauds Act, and that's currently in Congress, and we're doing work to try and get people educated about it.
Wow, that's a lot of work. I mean, there's so many things to cover. And is any you kind of mentioned overseas a little bit? Is there any country that's a little bit ahead of us in terms of grappling with all of these issues in AI?
Everybody's grappling with it. There's some places that have, are making it more of a priority, and some places just aren't. But I just think everybody's in the same boat. Yeah.
So how can artists protect themselves, when collaborating with, say, AI-generated music or using AI tools, in their songwriting process? How can artists sort of, make sure they're protecting their rights?
Well, here's the thing. If they're creating music and they're using some of these AI platforms to create music, I am under the, my position is they're still the creator and this is their music, okay? And just because they're using generative AI does not dilute the ownership and their copyright, and I'm going head to head with the Copyright Office on that. I mean, they had a call for comments after they met with a bunch of prominent law firms. They had a call for comments on this. And we all turned in our comment paper about that. And I spearheaded the comment paper for the 3 biggest advocacy groups in America, which is the Songwriters of North America that I co-founded, the Black Music Action Coalition, and the Music Artists Coalition. So we wrote a paper on behalf of those 3 groups in addition to my own personal paper, but everybody's aligned on that issue, okay? So we just have to keep being aligned on that. The one thing that they have to do, like how to protect themselves with deep fakes, that's almost impossible to protect yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, and the more unique your client's voice is, oh my God. The more unique, like we have Cardi B, and she has such a unique voice, and we just got to stay on it, diligent, pull it down when we see it. But again, it's like, it's going to start being whack-a-mole.
Right, exactly. Besides the things we've talked about, what recent legal developments or trends should artists also be aware of, as in the music industry of 2024?
Well, that's a great question. Because, all 3 major labels just obliterated a lot of their employees. Like, they all went through massive cutbacks. And again, it has to do with AI, right? Because whenever we have a disruptor in the music industry, the record companies pull back. And we can look at that trend. So, for example, when Napster came on the scene, it was a massive disruptor, and they pulled back until they can get ahead of it. So the same thing with AI. I mean, this is what happened. And because of that, it's really caused quite the recession in the music industry. Because I'll tell you, when the record companies pull back, we go into a recession. Because they're the only companies that put up any risk money. I mean, record companies, that ownership interest in a sound recording, that is the only intellectual property right out of the 2 copyrights and out of the musical composition and the sound recording copyright. That's the one that negotiates in a free market. The musical composition copyright is all regulated by the government. So, record companies, they put up the risk. They'll sign an artist put up the $5 million or so of what it costs to make the record, market the record, promote the record, and maybe 1 out of 10 of their artists actually hits and makes money. So it's a lot of risk money they put up. So when they pull back, the whole industry feels it. So right now, that's where we're at. We're in this trend where everything is being pulled back, which independently gives artists a lot of leverage, certainly on the platforms. 10 years ago, a really amazing artist didn't really have the wherewithal to put their record up internationally. Like right now, you can have, 1 million followers on TikTok and be playing shows at like 500 people a club, and you could upload your music to all 42 DSPs in the world, So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. Some would say that this business is complex by design. How can artists navigate today this complex landscape of music licensing and rights management?
Oh, it's so complex. Let me tell you something. Out of all areas of law and entertainment, film, TV, music, media, fashion, music is by far the hardest. I tell people, you want to branch out and be an entertainment lawyer in other fields, make sure you know music first. Because if you could understand music and all the customs and the precedents, in addition to the laws, like, oh my God, you can do anything. But yeah, it's complicated. And how do they navigate it? Honestly, the best thing any artist can do is get the Don Passman book, All You Need to Know About the Music Business.
Yeah.
It's the Bible. First of all, he's a great lawyer, okay? And he's funny as hell. And the book is great. And the book is written in layman's terms, layperson's terms, right? So anybody could read the book and really understand it. And the way the book is broken down, you can read it as you're in it. So all of a sudden you get this book and you're like, okay, I'm not going to read this fucking book, okay? But then you get a management agreement from somebody and you're like, okay, let me read about the management agreements. You read about the management agreements and you're like, I think I need to get a music lawyer. So you go to that section on music lawyer. Then you get those two people involved. And then one day you get a publishing deal. Let me read that section on publishing deals. Really, it's that. It's like what's his name? Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. You can, as you're in one, you can pick one out and read it.
Well, and he updates it regularly too, which is great. He
does.
Yeah.
I tell him every year he needs to send us a red line. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And with all of these things, but you must see some common sort of legal pitfalls and mistakes that all artists kind of find themselves stepping into. What are those things? And has it changed? Obviously there's AI and things like that, but are there still some things that artists still maybe should know better at, but still stumble into things?
Yes. The biggest one is they get incompetent representatives early on in their career. It is something that will end up hurting them for a very long time once they change out. So for example, artists early on might get a lawyer or a manager, and these people are not at the top of their fields, but they need somebody, and these representatives make really, tragic mistakes because they don't know custom. So they don't have industry custom. They might have Don Passman's book and they might know the law. That's what they have. But what they don't have is relationships and influence. And they don't know precedent and custom. So what happens is they just negotiate these deals and the client signs these deals, and then the client becomes really big, in a few years, huge, and they're stuck with these incompetent people with not good contracts. And hopefully they uptick, they come to someone like me, and then you change everything. And sometimes it takes a minute. Sometimes you're like, oh my God, your first 2 records they own. You're getting a 14-point royalty. And yeah, you have to pay them 10% of this big merch advance that you're getting. Like it can be really devastating, you know. So that's a thing. People, and I don't even know if there's a way to fix it. I mean, you know, new artists that are in secondary market, first of all, they don't have access to the big people, the ones with the influence. And even if they do, they're not at a level that you might, you know, the person might want to be involved because they're busy. But, you know, you just got to hope that they get educated enough that they just don't sign any deal.
Yeah. As we wind down here, Dina, before we hit record, you told us this really interesting story about, you know, your degree in music and how it's sort of come full circle with a client. I'd love for you to sort of tell our audience about that.
Yeah, I went to college and got a bachelor's degree before law school, and my bachelor's degree was in music. So I was a musician, or I guess a musician is being like an alcoholic, right? It's like once you're a musician, you're always a musician.
It never leaves you.
Right, so I was a musician, and I am a musician, but I haven't played in a long time. But yeah, and one of the bands that I opened up for, you know, was Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. So 36 years ago, I was her opening act, and now I'm her lawyer. It's full circle.
That's awesome.
I've known her and her manager, Kenny Laguna, very famous story. You know, when she left the Runaways and he was her producer and co-writer, you know, he produced this record that was amazing, and he shopped it around to record labels, and nobody wanted her. So they put it out themselves, and they drove themselves to radio stations talking to people. And, you know, that song on the record, I Love Rock and Roll, became a #1 hit.
Iconic.
Well, they've been running their company independent for 40 years. You know, so Kenny, when I was on tour with her, he used to bring his little daughter around. Her name was Carrie Ann. She's now runs the company. It's crazy.
Great story.
Wow. And didn't Kenny work for Morris Levy originally when he was younger?
It sounds like that.
I think
He's
did.
a character.
Yes, he is. I've bumped into him once or twice, and he is very entertaining.
You know, I recently took my kids to see Joan Jett down at the Forum, and the biggest hit of the show for my kids and their friends was Kenny Laguna.
That's awesome. That is great.
Dina, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. We just think the world of you, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and I hope we can talk again.
Well, This was lovely. I'm so appreciative that you invited me.
It's been a pleasure. Right. Thank you so much.
Have a great weekend.
All right.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.